Once again, I just want to welcome everyone who's joining us for today's Joining Hands virtual symposium session. Welcome to week 2. And we're here for the session on disability and intersectionality, a conversation with international exchange alumni with disabilities. And before I describe a little bit about the session, just know that we're going to have some time to talk with our panelists, get to know them a bit, but we also have plenty of time as well to take some questions from the audience later on, and we might ask you, dear audience, some questions as well and to chime in. You can either enter your questions in the chat, you could direct your questions specifically to my use of staff person, such as Joey Lenny or Monica, and we'll go through those a little later. And then we'll have a little bit of time at the end just to share any additional resources that we'd like to go over. So why did we want to have a session on disability and intersectionality? It's because we all experience identity in different ways, but going abroad, we were thinking about how it often challenges us to explore identity in new and sometimes surprising ways, especially in new cultural contexts. We might find how local people the way that local people perceive you might be different from the way you're perceived at home, and sometimes even how you perceive yourself. Certain aspects of your identity may be more quote unquote visible or stand out more than others. And this can be, positive, negative, or neutral. It could be flattering, it could be frustrating. You might find that some of the aspects of your identity that are the most meaningful to you, perhaps race, perhaps cultural heritage, or disability, they might seem to be overshadowed by other aspects of your identity that maybe you don't think about very much at home, such as your nationality or your perceived wealth. And so that's why we asked international exchange alumni with disabilities to reflect on some of their own experiences related to these dynamics and the interplay of things like disability, nationality, race, socioeconomic status, gender, sexual orientation, cultural heritage, religion, and more, all while traveling abroad. And some of their stories, I'm excited to share, are going to appear in an upcoming edition of our NCDE publication called A World Awaits You. We call it our Away Journal for short. And Joey Lenny is sharing a link in the chat that you can check out later. And this upcoming edition is going to be exploring themes on identity, diversity, intersectionality, pride, and community in the context of international exchange. And the motive behind this upcoming issue of the Away Journal is to celebrate disability as an aspect of diversity, which too often gets overlooked as an aspect of diversity in diversity initiatives. But at the same time, we want to recognize and celebrate that people with disabilities have additional aspects of identity that are important to them. And we wanted to give space to that. And we want to explore the question, what is it like to experience different identities in other countries during international exchange travel? So I'm joined by my colleague, Joey Lenny Moran of Mobility International USA, and we're so excited to welcome our presenters today. And I'd like for each of them to introduce themselves briefly. If you could each, I'll ask maybe Emily to start, and then Geraldine, and then Ice too. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, including where you're joining us from today, your pronouns, where you graduated from in your field of study, what you're working on now, and something that you're passionate about.
Hi everyone, my name is Emily Racinos. I'm coming to you from New York City. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and this past May, I actually graduated from New York University with my bachelor's in international relations. And I'm currently in the process of studying for the law school admissions test because I'm hoping to apply to law school soon. So that's what I'm doing right now. Something I'm passionate about, I guess, would be disability rights.
Thank you. Geraldine?
Hello, everyone. My name is Geraldine Dong, and I signed my name with a smile in front of my face. I'm in a mountain near the mountains in California, near San Jose, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I graduated from RIT with a bachelor's degree in 3D digital design. And I'm currently studying at the University of California at Santa Cruz. And I'm sort of trying to get a certification in UX and IX web design, UI web design. So this has been a great experience working in that field. I've been doing virtual academics, and it's helped me to work with people with disabilities, developing communication skills for people with disabilities in virtual environments. And I love learning new cultures, new foods, new languages, traveling, going to different states and different countries. And gosh, I'm looking forward to having a chance to travel again and meet more people. So, but I know we're going to have to wait for COVID to be resolved before that will happen, but I am excited for that.
Thank you. Ice2?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Ice2, and I'm coming from New York City. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I graduated from John Jay College of Criminal Justice in 2017. And currently, I'm working at Incarceration Nations Network, which is a global think tank for supporting prison reform efforts worldwide. And something that I'm passionate about is intersectional disability justice work and yoga as well. And I guess, yeah, is that all?
Yes, absolutely. And
Okay.
and Ice2 actually presented with Joining Hands last week also on a webinar bringing together Fulbright grantees and alumni with disabilities, and got to speak a little bit about your passions on that as well. So thanks again for joining us on this session too.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. And I'd like to invite our panelists just to give an idea for our audience what your international, I mean, for some of you, you've had multiple international exchange experiences. So for each of you, I'd like you to just tell us a little bit about, and let's stay in the, let's go in the order of Emily, Ice2, and Geraldine. Can you tell me a little bit about how you became interested in international exchange, if you can remember that far back? Tell us where you traveled for your international exchange experience, and if you had more than one, you can tell us a little bit about both. Things like, where did you go abroad, what year, how long were you there, and what was the main purpose of your international exchange? Such as, was it to study a certain subject or to get work experience? And then let us know if you received any specific scholarships or awards to help you do that. So let's start with Emily.
So I really had not thought about seriously studying abroad until I declared my international relations major, mainly because I didn't know of other people with disabilities that had gone abroad, whether that be for studying or volunteering or work. And the only reason why I really began to consider it was because it was a requirement of my major. And so that's when, once I was accepted into the international relations program, that's when I sort of really began to think about, okay, where would I want to go abroad, and for what reason? And so because my region of specialization was Latin America, I was told that I would need to study abroad in a Latin American country, which was great, but NYU only has one site in Latin America, which is the Argentina Buenos Aires site. So it ended up that I would have to go there, which I wasn't too concerned about, but my university wasn't sure if we would be able to sort of, they would be able to provide the proper accommodations for me to go there. And so that was definitely a tricky process. But the main purpose of me going there was to complete some regional specialization classes, as well as some foreign language classes. I took 2 classes taught by a local Argentine professor. One was about the culture, politics, and identity in Argentina, which was super fascinating. So yeah, that was why I was there. And in terms of like personal interest, I also wanted to sort of know what disability rights is like in Latin America. And I thought that by going to Argentina, that would also allow me to maybe get to know locals with disabilities and talk to them about their experiences, which I actually was fortunate to have the opportunity to do so. I was able to meet some local blind people who talked to me about their experience of going to college in Argentina and getting accommodations there and the challenges with that. I was there from August to December of 2018, so 4 months. And to fund my study abroad, I applied really only to one scholarship, the Benjamin A. Gilman International Scholarship Program, which I was so thankful to receive. That was also sort of a tricky process because I initially had applied to go to London because that's where my university was telling me would be the most accommodating for me. That's where I guess they thought would be best for me to go, but it wouldn't make sense to go to London if I'm studying Latin America. So I did apply to Gilman initially saying that I was going to London, but then once my university was able to figure out all the logistical parts of accommodations, academic and housing accommodations in Buenos Aires, I had to contact Gilman and then notify them that I would be changing my study away site, which I was concerned that they would, I don't know, maybe take away my funding, or I don't know, I wasn't sure what would happen there, but they were totally fine with it and they said that was no problem. The only thing is that they did reduce the amount of aid that they gave me because I was going to Argentina.
I know that Gilman, this is Ashley, has Gilman sometimes they want to see applicants who are not going to Western Europe as part of their international exchange. So I could imagine that that would only be more appealing to them, you know, if anything.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. And we're definitely going to dive into more about some of the things that you just talked about too. But let's see, let's have Ice2 share a little bit about your experience.
Yeah, so I've always been interested in international exchange and traveling abroad. And it was during my undergraduate career that I decided that I did not want to graduate without traveling abroad or studying abroad. And so luckily there was a Cape Town, South Africa program, a winter program that would work with my academic schedule so I wouldn't be missing any major courses that I could take over winter break. And so in January of 2017, I was accepted and traveled to Cape Town, South Africa for a course on apartheid and post-apartheid life. And it was such a fascinating time traveling abroad there, learning more about the culture and the history, the rich history of South Africa. And that the travel bug kind of stayed with me during that moment. And I knew that once I graduated, I wanted to continue traveling abroad with a structure, with an academic structure. And that is what led me to applying for Fulbright and ultimately winning the award.
Any advice? So the Fulbright program, and I've asked Joelini to include a link for anyone interested in that. Their application is due in September, so we've been getting a lot of people interested in that. Any quick advice as far as what you think made your application kind of stand out?
So with my application, my research, I decided to go for the research award, and my research was on notions of disability in Indian society. So I applied for an award to travel to India. And I think what made my application strong was the fact, multiple factors, was the fact that not many people research disability, I believe, for Fulbright, like research awards. I'm not like 100% sure on that, but I don't think they receive many people who are interested in that subject. So that created a niche, and also showing how feasible my research was in promoting awareness for disability in Indian society. And I think showing all of that really showed Fulbright how serious I was about this research and how important it was in the global sense for this research to be done.
Well, that's great advice, and I hope folks are taking notes out there. Definitely check out the Fulbright program. Joelini also included a link to the Gilman Scholarship in the chat window as well. And speaking of which, I believe we have another Gilman alum among us. Geraldine, we'd love to hear from you.
Great. Well, a long time ago, I had never imagined studying abroad. But so as a child, I was always kind of isolated, and I did think maybe I could visit Japan someday, but I never really thought about studying abroad because I'd never been there. I'd never been to Asia. So I thought I'd just go through my college experience and have typical experience. But when I saw an opportunity come up to study in Japan, I got really excited. So I did finally get a chance to go to Japan for 2 weeks. And it was very interesting. I really enjoyed it. And when I got back the next year, I had no idea that my major was going to force me to find an internship. And so I was having a hard time finding an internship in the United States. So as I was discussing with different people, I decided that maybe Singapore would be a good option for an internship, something I hadn't thought of. I thought I would have to be in the US. So I was excited for the international exchange program that my college set up for me. And I decided that I'd go and be involved in deaf education and things. I thought that might be interesting. But then I thought, well, maybe I should work more in my specialty. So I could study in Asia, but study in my technological issue. So I got a Gilman scholarship, and it was great. I started planning, and I did an internship and studied in Singapore during the summer. And then I started really trying to understand my own identity as an Asian American. And really, you have to understand, growing up, I didn't know very much about my Asian identity at all. And so going to Singapore really helped me sort of see other Asians in context. And I had never even realized what that would mean to me, and kind of get a sense for what that could be, and help my identity as an Asian American.
Thank you. And you really helped get to the crux of what we're going to be talking about today during this discussion. And it's interesting also to, learn about different experiences in terms of what you choose to study. A lot of people with disabilities have an interest in disability, either a personal interest or a professional interest. So some might choose to focus on that, like ICE2's Fulbright application stood out. Others might have an interest in that, but still want their exchange program to focus on maybe a technical field or, a different interest of theirs. So I love seeing the variety of what draws people abroad, and how they're getting purpose from it. I'd like to do something fun. I have a photo from each of your international exchange travels that I'd like to pull up. And starting with Emily and then ICE2 and Geraldine, I'd like you to each just briefly tell us what's going on in the photo. What does it look like? And is there a story behind it? Or is there a story that illustrates one of your most cherished memories from your time abroad? So I'll have Lydia bring up the first photo, which is of Emily. Emily, can you tell us a little bit about what's happening? And
Sure. So I believe I'm standing on the roof of a building. This was on a graffiti tour during the first week of orientation at NYU at the site, at the Buenos Aires site. And there's a lot of graffiti behind me on the walls, I believe. And yeah, I think I'm just standing. It was a really cool scene. You can see a lot of the city buildings behind me as well. So yeah, I mean, I think this picture is really interesting because this was right at the beginning of my trip, where I was still really new to the city, and maybe a little uncomfortable even, because this was such a new situation for me, being somewhere completely different that I've never been to before, versus later on in my trip. The university also organized a trip to Iguazu Falls. And I think for me that the two pictures are like beginning, end of trip, and they just have different, they cause sort of different emotions for me, because the beginning is just like really unsure, and then the other picture about Iguazu, I'm just like, yeah, I did it, I'm almost going home. And yeah.
Well, I love the idea of taking a tour when you first arrive, especially on topic of graffiti around town, just to kind of get your feet wet and maybe even meet some new people while you're there. Let's advance to the next photo, and I'll have Ice to talk a little bit about it.
So this photo is a really special photo to me. This was back in January of 2019. This is 5 months into my Fulbright grant. And this is, I was asked during Fulbright, they asked, like, does anyone want any host families? Like, who would be interested in being partnered with a host person, a local person in the city that I was living in at the time in Chennai. And I was interested and I applied, and I was partnered with Priya, who is in the turquoise blouse in the right of the photo. And we were celebrating Pongal, which is a South Indian holiday. And it was, I stayed with her family for about a weekend, and we drove into the village in Chennai, and it was an amazing time. I got to see all of the traditions of the Pongal holiday, which is making certain sweets, and also doing puja, which is a prayer to the gods in their home. And also I got to see a beautiful farm as well. And it was just amazing being in nature, being centered, and also feeling more connected to the culture, the South Indian culture during my time there. And yeah, just seeing this photo just makes me smile.
Makes us smile too. And it's such a wonderful thing when an international exchange opportunity has a host family option, and to be able to take advantage of that to really get a chance to explore things that maybe you wouldn't have been able to otherwise, or at least from a local perspective. So thanks for sharing that with us. And if we could advance to the next photo, and Geraldine's going to tell us a little bit about what's happening here.
Really, this was from a while ago. I was doing research, and I was looking for deaf restaurants and deaf employees. And I found this perfect place, and I was trying to figure out the local area and how to get there and so as I was trying to figure it out, we took a weekend to do that. So I planned to meet some people there, some deaf from Malaysia. And I thought, oh, okay, maybe they can come to Singapore as well. So we decided to meet, and we had a discussion. And so we got together as a group. There was just 3 of us. And we were finally able to meet because I was researching in Malaysia, and they wanted to come see me in Singapore. So we got to meet each other, and we found a restaurant that was very good quality. And when we met, we were worried that we weren't going to be able to communicate with each other. And we also was wondering if we wouldn't like each other's food, but we found something that we liked, and I tried it, and it was really good. It was the most delicious thing I've had. And I was so happy to finally be able to meet them. And they were so friendly, and I loved working with them and going around and touring. So we went to what they had suggested as 5-star places to go visit. So it was so fun, and I wanted to take a photo of them.
And can you describe just visually, what does this photo look like?
Sure. So there's a man on the left who is the cook, and they look like they have a yellow band around their head, and they're very skilled in vegetables and meats, and there's a lot of people around the restaurant, and most people in that area preferred vegetarian. So he would separate meat and vegetarian food. So that's the man on the left. The one in the middle is a woman. She's responsible for, and the video froze, she's very sweet. She's very understanding and kind. She loves to meet people. And so she's very open and chatty. And then it's me as the third person.
Thank you. Lydia, you can go ahead and stop sharing your photos. Well, I will just say, I've heard Singapore has some of the best, most delicious food in the world, and so I'm very envious of that opportunity and that you had some folks who were willing to show you their favorite dishes. What a fantastic.
You really need to go visit there someday.
Got one foot out the door. Well, you know, one thing that all three of you addressed a bit, which I thought was really exciting, is that you were able to find some local people with disabilities in your host community and connect with them in different ways, whether by meeting up or having them talk a little bit about their experiences living in that country, in that community, or perhaps as part of your internship or research. So we can talk about that a little bit more later. I do want to ask, though, a little bit about each of your experiences as a traveler with a disability. You know, both in terms of disability as part of your identity, but also in terms of any disability-related accommodations that you maybe might have arranged, or any local disability culture and resources that you identified while you were there, any strategies for access abroad, and more for anyone who might be watching this and wondering, maybe they're new to international exchange and wondering what goes into it if you're a traveler with a disability. Would anyone like to start? Maybe, maybe Geraldine, you could start.
Sure. It was a big challenge for me. I identify as a person with a disability, a deaf person, and a woman. And so my first chance to travel, I went to Japan with my class, and everything seemed fine. We had both deaf and hearing people in our group, and we were able to communicate with each other. Then my second study abroad was in Singapore, but it was so much different because I was the lone deaf person, and I began to feel like there was kind of a challenge. I was excited, and yet it was difficult, and people really noticed my deafness a lot more. And I went without an interpreter, and they told me I could have them, but I thought I wanted to be more independent. So I respected that they were going to bring the interpreter, but I'm trying to figure out how I was going to interact. So I thought I'd just go ahead and make that travel myself. So I did a lot of research before I left about the location, the times that I would need to be places, different things I needed to learn, how I could get around, different ways I might be communicating there. And I noticed that a lot of people there could speak English, and so I was able to write back and forth with them. I'm not able to speak well, but I could use my iPhone to talk back and forth, and so it actually worked quite well. But the challenge came when it got to be night, and it was harder to see, and so I was worried about people around me. I wasn't, you know, I was wearing my hearing aids, but I was worried that somebody might come up behind me, and that was a concern. So there was some fear in regard to that, but I thought I just need to be myself and be brave and be confident in what I can do. And I also learned a lot about myself through that process. And the challenges really were interesting for me to be able to go through and resolve.
Well, thank you. You shared a lot of different strategies and ways that you navigated your environment that I think, you know, I hope a lot of folks will be able to take away. You know, I'll just also add that people, even with similar disabilities, will use different types of accommodations, different strategies for navigating accessibility in their communities. It kind of depends on who you are as an individual, what is available in the host community, how, you know, how flexible you are. So a lot of different things factor in. So I appreciate your sharing all the many ways in which you were able to find, you know, thrive in your host community. Can I have, let's see, I forgot who I said was next. Perhaps Emily, you could comment on this, and then Ice too will.
Sure. So I am blind. I have some vision, but it is very limited. So Argentina was the first time that I would actually be traveling alone, especially on the way back. But I wasn't too scared about that because I do have friends who are blind or visually impaired and had shared their experiences about traveling as a blind person. And so I wasn't too unprepared for that, but I think once I was in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, that's sort of when a lot of the fears that I had here sort of came to life, because I was really concerned about traveling independently. I didn't know if that would be possible. So because I did express that concern to my university, they were able to contact a local instructor of the visually impaired in Buenos Aires, and he was able to meet with me a week prior to the academic semester beginning, and we did a lot of orientation and mobility lessons. So he was able to show me how to travel between my host family and the academic buildings, as well as how to get to nearby grocery stores and pharmacies, just in case if those were places I wanted to go. We also did a little bit of exploring on the subway, on their subway system, which was really helpful, especially because I had never been there before. And I really didn't do enough research into traveling as a blind person in Buenos Aires, and I really wish I would have, because I think I would have been a lot more prepared for not just meeting with him, but also sort of the challenges that I experienced when I was traveling independently. For example, he told me that even though I'm used to crossing the street by listening to parallel traffic, that wasn't something I would be able to do in Buenos Aires because drivers often don't obey traffic signals. So he said it could be pretty dangerous for me to try to cross on my own, and so that made me feel like, oh wow, does that mean that I won't be able to travel by myself here? Am I going to be limited to other people? And so I wish I would have thought about that a little bit more here before I actually was in Buenos Aires. But everyone was really friendly most of the time when I went out, and there was usually someone at the crosswalk ready to help me cross the street. So it ended up being okay, but I guess I just would have been able to mentally prepare for that, because the sort of freedom I have here really changed once I was there, and yeah, so preparing for that would have been great. In terms of like Braille and academic accommodations, that was mostly handled through my university. They were able to provide me digital Braille files by emailing them to me, so that issue wasn't so bad. In terms of hard copy Braille, that was another issue that I was concerned about, because I wasn't sure if I would find somewhere that could provide hard copy Braille. Thankfully, the same instructor, he had in the school that he works at, he had access to an embosser or Braille printer, and so they were able to provide all the hard copy Braille that I needed. So I think for me, it was a lot about making contact with people there who had access to the resources that I would need.
Okay, that sounds like some really interesting resources that you had at your fingertips there, as far as you know, having local orientation and mobility training. You know, I feel like that's something that I bet all international exchange participants wish they had, you know, when they're just arriving in a new community. And that sounds like you worked with your university, and that really stepped up to make sure you had what you needed. But as you mentioned, you know, you have to kind of be prepared that some of the usual strategies or accommodations you use at home aren't necessarily going to translate in the context of your host environment, whether it's because of different traffic laws or whatever it might be. So, okay, thanks for sharing that. ICE2, anything to add here?
Yeah, sure. So I identify as someone with a limb difference on my right arm, and how I navigate life back home is pretty independently. And so that's what I used during my time in India. And so I didn't need any special accommodation or any special disability related accommodation. I know that we'll talk about this a little bit later, but my Blackness took a much front seat than my disability did. So yeah.
Well, maybe this is a good time then to jump into that. Can you speak a little bit more about that? And I'll ask this of Emily and Geraldine also, but maybe ICE2, you could start us off. You know, just because, you know, I think you hit it on the head. You know, sometimes one part of your identity when you're going abroad is more front and center. I guess, did you feel like that when you traveled to India versus, you know, when you're here in the US or here in your host community? And if so, in what ways? And, you know, also other aspects of your identity too that you want to give space to. Feel free to reflect on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said earlier, I grew up in New York City, and so New York City is one of the most diverse cities in the US, and I never had to really think about my Blackness. It was just a fact, and I never really had to think, oh, okay, like I'm a Black person. I knew that I was a Black person. I was proud to be a Black person in my Black body, but it wasn't until I traveled to India that my Blackness was much more heightened. I became extremely hyper aware of my Blackness, you know, from the typical dealing with people, just knowing how different I was from everyone else and not really having someone that I could relate to in that space. And so everything like with my disability, that wasn't really the front and center thing that people looked at and reacted to. Is much more how I looked and how I presented. And everywhere that I went, I had to navigate how to deal with this hyper awareness, this newfound hyper awareness of my Blackness. And it came to a point where I started to question things, and it took a big toll during my time during my Fulbright, but among, you know, other things. But yeah, sorry, did you have like an extra question?
Well, yeah, I guess, you know, everyone has different supports, and you know, I noticed Emily said something about how she had blind friends who kind of shared some advice, you know, before she went abroad. You know, so having some people in that role, I guess I was wondering, did you have anyone, you know, anyone who could be that person for you before you went abroad? And if not, what did you, maybe you could tell us a little bit about one of the resources that you discovered during your Fulbright.
Yeah, so I did not do as much research before traveling to India about like how a Black person lives in India. I did not do that much research, which I should have done. And I wish I had done, because I think I would have been more mentally prepared for what I was to experience there, because I felt a little bit bamboozled when I got there. And it wasn't until a few months, so I arrived in India in August, and it wasn't until December that I saw my very first like Black person living there. And it was by chance. I saw her at a social setting, and I remember walking up to her and just wanting to, like, all of the stress and all of the emotions that I had been like feeling, just kind of like talking to her about it and just asking her questions. And thankfully we befriended each other, and we were able to travel throughout northern India together. And it was one of the best experiences I had. I felt like I could kind of just like sigh and like breathe, because I didn't realize how much of a huge toll it was to feel so isolated in that space. getting all of these really new experiences, but also feeling so alone in that way. And it was so amazing to have found her by chance and traveled with this other girl back in India.
And could you mention the role that Fulbright Noir also played?
I forgot. So during my time during Fulbright, I discovered Fulbright Noir from a fellow Black Fulbrighter who didn't live in my city. She was in a different city than me. And she told me about this Instagram account called Fulbright Noir, which was an amazing asset for me. I started reading through people's accounts and connecting with the people that ran this account. And Fulbright Noir is all about highlighting Black Fulbrighters all around the world, and just celebrating their research, celebrating the things that they do, and having a platform to just share experiences with each other. Actually, this year, we were able to mobilize together on a grand Zoom call and just talk about everything that we were feeling, especially with all the civil unrest happening right now. It was such an important time for all of us to come together. And that was such a huge, so those were extremely two huge resources for me during my Fulbright.
And beyond, it sounds like you're still, you know, getting so much out of those connections. So I'm really glad that you found those. And then let's see, Geraldine, maybe I could ask you, you know, you talked a little bit about your experiences growing up, how you didn't really have, you know, really deep connection to your Asian heritage or identity. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about, you know, what did you, when you traveled abroad, was that something that you wanted to learn more about? And if so, you know, how did you relate to that identity more when you were abroad? And also, if there are other aspects of your identity too that you want to comment on, maybe this would be a good chance to do that.
Sure. Growing up, I had maybe 2 or 3 Asian friends, and we were close, but we never really talked much about the Asian aspects of our identity. We were I mean, my family is Asian, but we never really talked in depth about that. So I don't know anything about the history, culture, nothing. My family never talked to me about that. So finally, when I was studying abroad in college, no, actually when I was studying in college, I saw so much more diversity. Growing up in Texas, though, there was diversity, but going to college was much more in depth because I finally had that opportunity to talk to people. I'd never met anyone who was Asian and deaf, which gave me not just seeing people who were diverse, but then being able to communicate with them. So it was a new level of learning about my identity. So some of them began to talk more about Asia. They knew more about their identity. And so they had a deaf club at RIT, and I was curious to be a part of the Asian American community. So that was where I started to learn and meet more people. And I had a lot of things I didn't know. I started to learn more about. And it made me feel a lot more happy and a lot more confident in my Asian identity and part of the diversity that I saw around me. But I still felt like it was just a smidgen of a kind of general Asian identity rather than a specific Asian identity. So going to Japan and Singapore gave me so much more than I even had learned in college. It was amazing. I'm never going to forget who I am as an Asian person. Asian American is so many times you're thinking about just being Asian or just being American as kind of a general identity. But then going to those countries, I had to learn a lot more in depth of that, who I am as an Asian, and figure out what that means in general. So the process was difficult, and I feel like I improved. I don't feel like I know everything. I feel like I have still growing and learning about that identity. But I think one interesting thing is that, you know, learning about Asian identity, Asian American identity helped me feel more confident in myself.
And that's absolutely one of the big benefits of international exchange is, you know, different ways to explore, tap into some self-confidence, gain some independent living skills, improve self-esteem. And so I think, you know, I hope that more people will seek out international exchange, and even if they feel nervous about it, knowing that maybe by the end it'll be a chance to look back on the experience and think, man, I've grown. And your families will probably notice it, your friends will probably notice it. Emily, can you tell us a little bit about, you know, what do you want attendees to know about any identity, you know, other identities as they intersect with disability for you? And, you know, what does that look like in your home community versus when you were traveling?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think for me, my international exchange experience really made me question and really reflect on how I think of my identity in a very US context, because here, obviously, I just say I'm Latina, and that's what I look like, and that's just what people think will assume as well. But when I was in Buenos Aires, I remember I was having this, we were having dinner with my host mom, and I don't know what I was talking to her about, but I said something along the lines of, oh, and my white friends, blah, 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 because that's just what I would refer to people who are white here, and wouldn't think about it a second time. And she sort of was like, hold on, like, you're white. And I was just taken aback a bit, because I was like, no, I'm not. But I really had to think about what that meant and why she was saying that to me. And I realized that in her eyes and in the culture there, I would be considered a white person, even though that's not at all what I would ever say about myself. And so it just really made me think about how I'd identify. But it was also interesting because once I was there, I did have a lot of people thinking that I wasn't American, that I wasn't from the US, because because I'm not white and I don't have blonde hair and not blue-eyed. And I was told by my own host mom that her grandson was questioning her if I was really from the US, because most of the students she had hosted didn't look like me. Okay. And so that was also really interesting to think about, because it made me realize that I am not the typical US student that is going to Buenos Aires. I'm one of the few, and that's why a lot of people didn't initially believe I was from the US. And I thought that was also kind of funny, because I was like, okay, then maybe I won't be from the US. And I started identifying as being from El Salvador, because that is where my family is from. We are from El Salvador. And so I just started telling people that I was from El Salvador, rather than telling them that I was from the US, especially when I was by myself. I think at times I also did that because I felt more comfortable, or more safe maybe, saying that I was from Central America rather than saying that I was from the US. So yeah, I know it really made me at many times think about what parts of my identity I choose to identify with. And I didn't even think I would question being Latina there at all, or what that means. I thought my biggest issue would be my blindness, that people would want to know more about my blindness. Yeah. And they did, but not as much as they wanted to know where I was from. And also had some people thinking that I was from Venezuela, because there was the crisis in Venezuela at the time. And so a lot of people thought that I was seeking asylum in Argentina. And that was also really interesting to have those conversations too. Yeah.
You raised so many interesting points. One is, you know, our US definitions of diversity. And I think a lot about, you know, at MIUSA, we talk a lot about, and NCDE, we talk a lot about not just people from the US going abroad, but also international visitors, international students coming here. And, you know, I imagine what must be going through their minds when we're talking about our kind of different definitions of diversity and identity. And how we really have to be specific or really clarify what we mean by those, because they're not necessarily going to be coming with those same definitions, the same categorizations. And so it is really interesting to reflect on that from a US perspective. And then the other being nationality and how you're perceived. And I was wondering, Geraldine and ICE2, did you also have, you know, these interesting kind of interactions with people as far as perceptions about your nationality, whether you're American or whether you're perceived to be from other countries? And, you know, maybe you could comment on, for ICE2, it could either be in India or South Africa or both, and for Geraldine in Singapore or Japan or both. I'd love to hear. How about from ICE2 and then from Geraldine?
Yeah, when Emily was speaking about her experiences of just people kind of denying her Americanness and all of these things, I was just nodding my head a ton because while living in India, no one believed that I was from the US, and they would either ask, are you from South Africa or are you Nigerian? It was always those two that I received. And I would always have to correct people and say, no, I'm from the US. And it was always a back and forth because they could not fathom that a Black person would be from the US. And I know that in India, there is a certain city that there are a few migrants from the African nation that do migrate to India, but the fact that they couldn't just understand or agree that I was from the US was so interesting for me, because I never had to, I guess, think about or argue with the fact that I'm American. And that was just so interesting to think about. Yeah, just like navigating all of that and feeling so, I guess, I wanted to know why I was fighting so much for my identity here and why people were so like strange. I even remember an incident of someone running up to me just to ask if I was Nigerian. I would be shouted out, "Are you Nigerian? Are you South African?" And hearing the US, just they couldn't fathom that. So that was all really interesting.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
That is really interesting. And Geraldine, I'm curious, did your experiences echo those of Emily's and ICE2's, or did you have different experiences?
Excuse me, do you mind repeating the question one more time?
Sure. My question is, when you were traveling abroad, did you ever have to grapple with your identity, your nationality identity, as someone from the United States? Like when you were traveling, did local people question your Americanness, whatever that might mean to you? Did you have to convince people, yes, I'm from the United States, the way that ICE2 and Emily did?
A little. Actually, it's funny. I had a lot of different connections at school, and growing up, I used to being around a lot of diversity. So we all had different faces and different identities. So people are always trying to guess where I'm from. They thought, you know, are you Chinese or Japanese or Korean? So I've already had that experience as an American. They don't expect me to be American, even in the US. So I was born in London. So when they say, oh, you're American, but then I was born in London, that's also a confusion, because they think if you're born in London and you live in the US, but you look Chinese, you should be Chinese. So growing up in the United States, I had that battle my whole life. My heritage is from Vietnam, but I don't have a very strong look. I'm much more Chinese looking. Some people think I'm Korean, but no one ever guesses that I'm Vietnamese. So this is something I have in the US to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks to all three of you for
also, you know, my nationality, when I was visiting Asian countries, I started learning about what it was to be Asian, and I enjoyed that. So now when I came back, I feel like, fine, if you'd like to think I'm from somewhere else, I'll take on that identity as well.
yeah, it's kind of like what Emily was saying, you know, if you keep hearing it from people telling you that you are something, you're kind of like picking your battles, or, well, I guess there's some truth to that, so let's just go with that. So it's interesting. Joey, Lenny, I want to have you take the mic, because I know you had some questions as well for the panel. And remember to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, sure. I'll take it over. I'm going to shift gears a little bit, but before I do that, I did want to ask, in terms of, you've had such a great conversation so far, in terms of like things that you, I guess, learned during your travels about identity, was there anything that you came back with, maybe a new perspective, identified differently once you came back to the US because you had learned something about identity in your host country? So how about we start with you, Aistu?
Sure thing. Thank you for the question. So for me, researching disability was something extremely new for me. That was just, it was it was such a not difficult, but it was really hard for me to kind of be comfortable researching and understanding disability. And so my Fulbright research was an opportunity for me to understand disability and be comfortable learning about it in an academic way. And what I took from my Fulbright research grant and brought it back home was more comfort on understanding disability and researching it and being curious about it, and identifying it strongly and proudly, and just being more open to all the diversities within the disability community and what all of that means. So that's what I brought back.
Yeah, that's great. Emily, do you want to go next? And I'd love to hear more about your project later on. I'll ask a follow-up question just so we can get more from you. But Emily, would you like to share if you learned anything different from your time abroad?
Yeah, this was about if I changed my perception about any part of my identity, right?
Yes.
Okay. I think for sure, especially because I just really thought that I wouldn't be questioning, you know, my identity in Buenos Aires. So when I came back, I guess I was even more aware of how it changes depending on where you are. And as someone who would like to travel more and possibly work somewhere in Latin America in the future, I think it just made me think about the fact that once I am in a new country, I really have to sort of begin to pick up and learn their own understandings of race and ethnicity, and, you know, begin maybe to interpret their understandings, because I was just really, I wasn't expecting that at all this first time around. And so now I know in the future when I go somewhere, just the way that I see myself isn't necessarily the way other people are going to see myself, especially when I'm not in the US, because that all changes so much.
Thank you. Geraldine, did you have any aspect of your identity that you learned more about while you were abroad and came back with something different after your travels?
Yes. So when I was traveling, I went out all the time. We would go every weekend, even every day, out to restaurants and around. And as I was traveling, I really did a lot of soul searching about my own identity during that process. Trying to figure out who I am. So, because I'd never experienced being in Asia before, and so realizing that this is an ancestral identity and connection. So I always was so curious about what people were doing and did a lot of people watching. And during my time, I wrote a journal recording some of my thoughts and really recalled back growing up and all of the time I've been trying to understand what that means to me as a person who is Asian and how that has impacted me. And I learned so much about myself doing that journaling and thinking back on the change. So when I came back to the United States, having done all that self-reflection, I didn't have the need as much to reflect because I had been to Asia and I was willing to go through and feel more confident about the identity after having had that exploration so that I could go forward with who I am.
Thank you for sharing that, Geraldine. It's really interesting. And I'm going to pass it back to Ashley because she has another question related to identity before we switch gears a little bit.
Yeah, you know, I was wondering if, first of all, if gender, you know, if you observed any interesting dynamics with gender as far as being in your host community. And then also just if anyone wanted to share, you know, Geraldine just mentioned how being abroad was it was part of an ancestral identity and ancestral connection. And being that all of you have, you know, family who are, or extended family who are immigrants to the United States, some other countries, some other parts of the world. I was curious, and just given the important role that family plays in international exchange and encouraging people to go abroad, I was curious, like, what was your family's reactions when you told them that you wanted to go on international exchange and where you wanted to go? And I was just kind of curious if those were interesting conversations that you had. Who would like to start? You don't all have to answer if you don't want to, but.
Oh, I don't mind starting.
Great.
This is Geraldine. Okay. Great. When I was growing up, I knew my family was spread out all over. My dad's family and my mom's family lived all over the place. They lived in different countries. Most of them lived in Europe. A few lived in Asia. Let's see, and the third we had in the United States, and there was one or two in Canada, and so we were all spread out all across the world. So most of my family spoke English. There were a few that spoke Vietnamese and French. And then, of course, I'm a signer, an American Sign Language signer. So growing up, I'm curious. For many years, what does that mean if we're all over the place? And what does it mean in Asia? What was our family heritage from Asia? And then finally, I was able to study abroad in Japan and Singapore, which gave me a little bit more sense of what that was like, but also to bring my family, hopefully my family would be able to understand that. I thought that growing up, they could have a better understanding of who they were by going. So I think my family was spread out, but that actually gave me more inspiration to travel myself because they had done that. I had a grandfather who's a diplomat who traveled all over the place. So this is a very cultural heritage of my family to be traveling, and I wanted to be like my grandfather. So I believe that my grandfather's spirit is in the next generation with me, and in the next generations with me as we travel the world like him.
I love that you, you know, that aspect of your identity helped motivate you to want to do international exchange. And, you know, some people do select the type of exchange they do or the location, the destination, based on some part of their identity that they want to learn more about. So let's see, would Emily or ICE2 also like to comment on that? Emily, go ahead. I think you raised your hand, I'm not sure.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can.
Okay,
yes.
Perfect. Yeah, I was going to say that I think for me, similar to my family, also had a big impact on like the process of doing international exchange, because as I said, my parents are both from El Salvador. They didn't come here together, but they both left El Salvador during the time of the Civil War. And so I think for them, it was like, why do you want to go to Latin America almost? Because they were like, we fled, you know, we were leaving, and we, you know, they have gone back, but to visit. And so for me, being first generation American, I always have been interested in the politics of Central America, South America, and I wanted to go and learn about it more. And so I think having that conversation with them of why I wanted to go, why I felt comfortable going there, even though they themselves were a little scared, I would say, of letting me go there, especially by myself. And I think the blindness aspect of it also was really unnerving for them, because you know, they were like, what are you going to do if someone tries to harm you? Or they just had a lot of questions, and I had similar questions as well, but I think I had to sort of guide them as well through the process to make them comfortable with the idea of letting me be there and letting me go, really, because I knew that this is what I wanted, and I felt pretty comfortable in my ability to handle the experience and keep myself safe. And so I think it also did help, though, that they did leave their country at the end of the day and made a home in another country and have been here for a long time. So I think that sort of helped ease them into the idea that one day I could also possibly go somewhere else and be living away from them. And I think this was like their first experience of that happening. And so maybe that, I don't know, their own experience with leaving their home could have helped in easing them into it as well.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. That's a really interesting take on it and perspective, and just trying to see things from your family's point of view, and kind of what their own stories, how that kind of impacted your experience too. You also talked about safety, and that also again makes me think about, you know, gendered type of international exchange travel, and like, you know, as women, as you know, and also non-binary people and men, you know, are they thinking about issues of safety in different ways? Or, you know, are families emphasizing safety with, you know, with almost a gendered kind of perspective? And so let's see if anyone wants to comment on that, or ICE2, if you want to comment on the previous question, you're welcome to do so now.
Yeah, sure. So what I noticed during my time in India is that many of the public spaces were dominated by men. Men really took up a lot of space, and it was really different for me to kind of see how much men took up space, as opposed like as a Black woman trying to like navigate that space, and not really understanding, are they staring at me because I'm Black, or is it because I'm a woman? Like, which identity was much, you know, were they staring at? And so that was really interesting for me to try to navigate and understand, like, which is it? I remember an experience where I was at a supermarket once, and I was standing on the line, and I remember a man had came and like kind of skipped me, and that happened multiple times. And I was really curious what gave him that permission to do that. Like, is it because I was a woman standing there, and so he felt that it was okay for him to do that, or is it because I was Black? And, you know, this aspect of feeling invisible in this space, and was it my identities creating this invisible factor? And to talk about, to answer your question about like family, both of my parents immigrated from West Africa in a country called Guinea. And when they settled in the US, they didn't really do much traveling. It was all about just creating a life here. Mm-hmm. And when I first traveled to South Africa, I was one of the first in my family to travel outside of the US. And it was a lot for them. And by the time I was going to India, and to tell them that I'd be gone for 9 months, they just couldn't imagine that I was going to do that. And it took a lot to talk to them. What I kind of emphasized to them was the importance of my research, how it was important for me, for my own personal growth. And by doing that, it would expand me. And I think they understood how important it was for me to do this. And they were much more willing to let me and support me in this, my travel abroad.
I'm so happy to hear that you had that support. I also just wanted to comment on something you mentioned, almost this kind of back and forth between invisibility and almost being too visible, you know, in different ways. And I know that that's something that people with disabilities grapple with here in the United States or in their, you know, in their home communities, but also when you're going abroad, that comes up again, but maybe in like a different way. And so I thought it was interesting that you kind of almost in the same breath expressed both of those feelings of being invisible, but also maybe too visible and not necessarily in the ways that you're wanting to be. I think that's really interesting. Let's see, I'm gonna have Joey Lenny ask our closing question. And then in the meantime, I'd love for our attendees to share any questions that they have. And also to our panelists, be thinking of questions you have for one another too. We definitely welcome those. And Joey Lenny, if you want, you're also welcome to share anything from your experiences, but otherwise I'll have you take the mic.
Thanks, Ashley. And I just wanted to share very briefly that in the comments, we've been hearing a lot of thank you for sharing your experiences, and people are really enjoying the conversation. So just wanted to share that with all of you. And actually the last part of the conversation like really resonated with me in terms of, I said to you mentioned like grappling with intersectionality and just not knowing why something is happening, which of your identities is really the issue in a certain situation. And I think that really kind of wraps up the conversation in the terms of it's about diversity, and we have so many different identities, and that's why disability needs to be included in these conversations of diversity and these efforts really to prepare students better. So my question would be for you all in terms of like whether you have a piece of advice you would give international education educators about offering or preparing students in terms of diversity and access. Like what is one piece of advice you would give an educator about supporting a student or improving a program or anything that you think would be beneficial for the educator to know or for the student to be prepared in? If anyone who wants to start.
Sure, I'll go. The thing, what you mentioned about intersectionality within the disability community and also in other movements, I think is so important. Disability justice should be a part of every movement, from feminist movement to civil rights to criminal justice. I think it's so important to ensure that the disability and the topics of it and the people who are experts in this field and those with disabilities all need to be included in this conversation. So what I would advise is to bring on those in the community who are advocating for disability justice in the spaces of international exchange, because it is something that will benefit all. and it's not just for just the disability community, but it will benefit all. So I would encourage bringing those people who are experts in this, in the disability justice field in that conversation.
That's great. Anyone else? Emily?
I completely agree with ICE too. I think that just giving voice, giving the space for people to share their experiences about intersectionality abroad is so important, because when ICE was talking about like being invisible because of being a woman, and I also had a lot of those similar experiences too, where I wasn't sure if something was happening because I was blind or because I was a woman. I had this experience at a grocery store with one of the like security guards just came up to me and like grabbed me and squeezed me really tight, and I didn't know if it was like oh, you're blind, so I think I have the right to like touch you, or if it was like you're a woman and I can like move you without saying anything to you. And so it was just it really caught me off guard, and I was not prepared for an experience like that. So I think thinking about, you know, how does me being a woman and blind, like how does that affect the experiences that I might have? And again, going back to the safety issue, like how am I going to make sure that I am keeping myself safe? And if something like that happens, how am I going to respond to it? Because I honestly was just in shock, because he just grabbed me sort of out of nowhere, and it was really scary. And I never ended up going back to that grocery store because he made me so uncomfortable.
Thank you, Emily. Geraldine, would you like to add anything?
Yes. I agree with ICE too. And also I wanted to add, so important for a person with a disability to know what they need and to address the concerns that when they face those issues. If they require an interpreter, if they require some kind of support, whatever it is, to make sure that they have the services they need when they're traveling abroad. If you need someone in addition to you to go with you into different areas, I think it's important to bring that person, because we need to champion each other's, you know, our relationships, and find people that can help us to navigate some of those spaces that are a little more difficult. So, we know, finding friends that were willing to support us and give us that help through those difficult spaces.
Thank you. Yeah, I can definitely resonate with a lot of the stories that you guys shared. I myself remember being, I studied away in London, and I remember just being confused sometimes as to why something was happening. I wasn't sure if it was because I was physically disabled and I was in a wheelchair, or if it was because of my Blackness or the language I was speaking. I wasn't often sure. So it is, I guess, a relief to see that experiences can relate across the board, even if they're positive or negative. And we have a question from the audience. I think it's I guess, a fun one to ask in terms of just reminiscing on travel and the current situation we're in. But Susan Zhu asked if, when we're able to travel again, where do you want to go, and what do you hope to achieve in your next travels?
Good question.
Definitely. I'll get us started just to give you a little bit of time to think about it, but I definitely think I want to go back to Dominican Republic and visit my country and to see some of my family members and relatives soon. And yeah, who wants to get us started?
I can go.
All right, Emily, go ahead.
Yeah, I would also probably want to go back to El Salvador, because having this experience of meeting locals with disabilities in Argentina was something that I want to do in El Salvador. And I think that would be amazing to not just meet other blind individuals, but also other people with disabilities there, and see sort of what disability is like in that context, because I don't know anyone else who's from El Salvador and is disabled. And so I would love to get to hear that experience.
Yeah, I'm dying to go to Brazil. I've always wanted
Ooh.
to go there, and I also am really curious about, I guess, the disability justice movement and what's happening there. And like all of us discussed about like invisibility, I'm curious about this concept of the invisible stage and performative, like all about the body and things of that nature. So I'd love to go see what I can find out in Brazil.
Well, I've known people who have received more than one Fulbright grant, just saying. So
Fingers.
I know you'll make it happen one way or another. Well, I just want to say thank you so much to all of our panelists today. Ice2, Geraldine, Emily, we're really thankful that you took time out of your day to touch on these really important discussions that don't get talked about enough. And I almost think we should share this recording with as part of pre-departure orientation for anyone who wants to go abroad, just to start thinking about these types of questions. And to our audience, I want to thank you as well for joining in and sharing your questions and comments. I would love to also just remind you that the Away Journal is going to be coming out this fall, and there will be stories about Geraldine, Ice2, and Emily, plus some more great photos. And then there's also going to be some other articles by people who wanted to share about other aspects of identity that we didn't really touch on. You know, what is it like to be a non-binary person traveling abroad, or a queer person traveling abroad, or someone Jewish heritage and identity, and other aspects that you know, we want to learn more about. And so look out for that, and be sure to follow MIUSA and NCDE so that you can get notified about that, and also the recording of this presentation. And to our attendees, I would love to know in the chat window if you could answer this question, and it's totally optional. I am most proud of this part of my identity. A self-reflection question. I'm most proud of this part of my identity. And you can either be specific, or you can be general. But if you're willing to share, it would just be, I would love to know what some of the identities you're proud of. We have Dea from UW, being a Latina. Thank you. Being a woman, says Nele. Being a Bolivian woman, says Sarah at Kent State. Thank you so much for participating. Resilience, being a resilient person, yes, says Kathy. It's really interesting to reflect on questions such as, you know, what part of your identity are you most aware of, or what parts do you not think about very often? How, you know, questioning, how will this change when I'm traveling in another country? And also what, you know, wanting to learn more about a certain part of your identity. And I think we touched on that as well. Let's see, we also say, folks saying being a woman, being proud of being a gay woman, being a woman with ADHD, being an artist, being Black and deaf. Thank you so much, everyone. And I'll just say, let's see, any final words from anyone before we close this out? We have 1 minute left. Jen says thank you to all the panelists, and you know, I think that's a good good note to end on. And maybe really quickly, I'd love to invite our attendees to turn on their videos if they wish, and we'll take a group photo. Laura says thank you all for sharing and reflecting today. So this is your opportunity to turn your videos on if you like, if you want to. And then once everyone has theirs on, we'll do a countdown and get a quick pick. All right, and Lydia and Monica, do you have your finger on the camera ready to go?
Camera is ready to go.
All right, great. All right.
This is a great screenshot. 1, 2, 3. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.